We have arrived. This is Webb Parton, your host, and we welcome you to the Free Range Dogs podcast. This is a place where we stake out a shady spot and talk about all things dog. Find yourself a soft piece of grass, spin a few circles, plop down, rest your feet, and join us in this joyful conversation. Hi, Kristi. It's so nice to have you with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and with our folks out there. I specifically wanted to talk with you because you are someone who knows about dogs and the way they can use their nose. And just so that we let our folks know out there, this is Kristi Smith. And Kristi, do you want to go ahead and you're of Dog Trainers LLC, Canine Development Campus. Do you want to do a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. My name is Kristi Smith, and I am the head trainer for Dog Trainer US in our Canine Development Center that's located in Peoria, Arizona. We train general pet dogs. We train behavior modification, as well as a lot of the scenting areas, such as search and rescue, therapy, facility, and service dogs, which we do all of that training with those dogs by scent. The dog sees the world through its nose, and so that's how we help train them to perform the actions that we want them to perform. I've been doing this training full-time since early 2005 here in the Phoenix metro area, and we have clients that are all over the world that we train to do a variety of these scent-based exercises.
Okay. And I will be including your contact information on the podcast info. So our folks out there listening will be able to go to the website and capture your contact stuff if they didn't get it while we were talking.
Awesome.
And so, I have kind of a unique job, as you do. I mean, the first thing I think about when I step out of a truck and I'm getting ready to go to work is which way's the wind blowing. And
exactly.
Yeah. And, that's, what's that old Dylan song about, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows.
Yeah.
It has been my experience that it's so difficult to get us humans to think in terms of scent and the way a dog perceives the world. And when we work with dogs, most of the humans that have dogs assume that a dog sees the world like a human does, meaning it sees, we humans see the world through our eyes. And it is so different for a dog. They gauge the world through their nose. And, our primary sense of how we perceive things and how we discern things is to look at it. And that's really kind of secondary for a dog, because the first thing they do is they go to smell it. Now, over the years, I've worked with all different breeds in aversion training. And I know you've had similar experience. You train a broad array of different folks and different breeds. And you're one of the few people that I've worked with that is able to look at a dog and see it the same way I do. Because when I look at a dog, I'm looking for a tell. I'm looking for their nose to pick up something. I'm looking for them to react a certain way to show me that they are perceiving it through their nose. And I see you doing that as well. Do you struggle, as I have, in trying to get folks to understand that scent is more important than eyesight to a dog?
Absolutely. And I think it's because humans don't utilize our senses the same way that a dog does. So it's really hard for them to see the subtleties of the dog using its nose to see things. I get clients all the time that say, I don't understand why I walk into a room when I get home, my dog barks at me. And it's like, okay, well, probably because the dog saw a big object, but it can't identify you yet until it can smell you. And depending what's going on in the ventilation system in your home, it may take a minute or two for the dog to be able to smell you. People don't think that way. They think, well, they should be able to see me. I had a dog yesterday. I've got a young dog in training that we're training to be a cardiac alert dog. And I had somebody come visit with their dog. And my cardiac alert puppy that we're just started training started acting really weird around this person. And it's because she smelled the physiological changes that was going on in this person who was having a heart episode. And she didn't know quite what to do, but she knew she needed to do something. You couldn't physically look at Rachel and tell there was anything going on, but that dog smelt it. And I was the one that recognized it, that I said, Rachel, what's going on with you? And she says, well, my heart is racing and then it drops. And she said, I need to sit down because she'll pass out. And that's exactly what was going on with the dog. But none of the other trainers that I even had here recognized that that's what the problem was and why the dog reacted that way, because we had never seen her react that way before. Mm. But here she had a live person in front of her putting off all the scent instead of a little scent sample. Mm-hmm. So there's a big difference in the amount of scent that dog was getting hit with. And I don't know how you can get people to understand how the scent works. I have little tricks that I use to explain it to my search and rescue people. But, because we don't use our noses, even if you blindfold me, I'm not going to utilize my nose the same way that the dog does. And people just don't understand that. A dog smells, since the smell is so much greater than ours, they smell everything that makes up something almost to a molecular level. And we humans do not do that. Yeah. So we can't even fathom that. And, it takes a unique individual that's just willing to watch dogs and take the time to watch them and see the subtleties and be able to correlate those subtleties with what's going on with the dog. Most people don't want to spend that much time. We live in a really fast-paced society, and they don't want or can't take the time to actually study what the dog is telling them. Mm-hmm. And that's a reason that there's always a communication breakdown between humans and the dog.
Well, I had a fascinating conversation. This has been a few years back, but I'd been on the road for a few weeks, and I was working in North Ogden Valley, northern Utah. And I had spent the last 2 or 3 days with search and rescue dogs. And we were working out of a side area on a veterinary facility. And it was just a beautiful view because you could look and we were in this bowl and you saw the Wasatch, front just above us, just wrapped around us. And I was at the end. It had been several weeks. I was about ready to go home. And we finished up this last group of 2 or 3 days worth of search and rescue dogs. And sat down on the tailgate, and the head trainer was there. And he had been the guy that had facilitated bringing these different teams in from different parts of the state to get the training. We were doing diversion work. And we sat down on the tailgate, and he started talking to me about scent. And these were search and rescue dogs, cadaver dogs principally. And they were using just a chemical cue, the chemical from decomposing bone. So it's not like it's a big sample. It's a very minute thing. But these dogs were trained to that. And we're sitting there looking at this vista of all this lavish Rocky Mountain stuff around us. And he's pointing up at these different drainages. And he's talking about different searches they had done. And he said that one of the issues they have there is that the Pioneer Trail had come through there. So there's still bodies in the ground up there that are, 150 years old or 200 years old, however. And he said that when a body decomposes, the bone breaks down and that chemical runs to the low part of the grave and tends to pool there. The scent pools there. So they don't smell a grave, they smell the corner of a grave where everything is settled to it. And he said that one of the things that happens is that when they lose someone, when someone goes on a hike and they get injured some way or go up, commit suicide, whatever, they're looking for a body. He said that, if a body's been up there for 3 or 4 weeks, it certainly is a very strong smell to us humans. But he said that it doesn't really impress the dogs much. What they're looking for is that chemical, that, bone. And it was so different from the world I came up in, which was gun dogs and bird dogs and, game scent cues and such. And I know you've had that same experience with search and rescue work and that. With even the difference, you had mentioned your bloodhound to me the other day. And I've worked with a few bloodhounds with search and rescue groups. A very different sort of affect in the way they use their nose compared to Australian Shepherds or Golden Retrievers or whatever. And so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how different it is for the different breeds of dogs. They have different varying degrees of scent acuity, but they're all so much better than we are that it's hard to even compare. But I'm presuming, because you're currently working with Belgian Shepherds at this point?
Yes, Belgians. I have Belgians, and I also have an Australian Shepherd. And then on our team, we have a variety of dogs as well on the team.
Okay.
That we work with.
And you're typically looking for people that are missing, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Live or dead.
Okay.
Either some of them are murdered, so they're buried. Some are dumped in water, or they've drowned. So they're live or dead in any environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a big difference between the breeds of dogs. I tend to, look at the dogs and, what do they do naturally? What are they bred genetically to do? A bloodhound and the majority of hounds are bred and genetically predisposed to put their nose on the ground for the most of them. You have a few that are your sight hounds that are different. But when they put their nose on the ground, they bury that into the ground, mm-hmm. and they snuffle up and pull up into their nose all the particles that they want to process. Whereas your Belgians and your German Shepherds and those, unless they're trained to put their nose on the ground, their natural instinct is to use air scent to locate a source. And like you talked about the scent cone off the snake yesterday, any person out there or piece of a person, any source, is going to also have that cone, and that cone gets wider and wider as it gets further and further from the source. Mm-hmm. And the dogs are trained to go up it. A dog whose nose goes to the ground operates that scent cone a little bit different. It doesn't cast back and forth running out of the scent and follow it up. It actually follows it directly on the actual path where all the scent is laying. That's how it gets to the scent source.
And so it's not a function of, there are particles floating in the air that a dog with his nose up picks up, but a dog like a bloodhound is actually picking up particles from the ground and from vegetation and such where the particles have clung or are laying there?
Correct. Now, an air scent dog will also go to brush and stuff. Mm-hmm. They will go to ground if that's the only place that they find the scent. But because of how they work, they're used to casting across air currents running a grid pattern like a searcher would do. Mm-hmm. But they're running across the wind until when they hit their scent of their source, then they start working that cone as it gets narrower and narrower to the source, where the bloodhound is going to go straight up the cone typically, or wherever the scent is laying. A well-trained bloodhound will probably stick within 20 feet of where a person has actually walked, mm-hmm. Or where the scent is being pushed along the ground. Temperatures, terrain, all of those things affect what happens with the scent as well. So obviously when you have bright sunlight and heat, it's going to pull the scent straight up. When you've got cooler temperatures or a little bit of rain, that rejuvenates the scent and it pushes it down a little bit, keeps it lower to the ground. So the dog's head is a good indication of mm-hmm. where the scent is the strongest as well. I worked years ago, we worked some people that we hid out in cornfields. And it was really amazing because our air scent dogs, because of how thick the cornfields were, the scent was being pulled up to along the top of the corn. And so those search dogs would actually leap up. So they were higher than the corn to get a whiff. And mm-hmm. that's how they worked that pattern, mm-hmm. Where the bloodhounds went straight through, low mm-hmm. to the ground. Mm-hmm. It was just really odd. But that's just a different way of scenting.
Well, I know when I come home from work or from a session or training, particularly my lab, but I have a wire hair as well. They come in and they immediately go to my boots and my pants. And it's like they're reading the entirety of what my day has been and all the dogs I've worked with. And it's like they're getting an entire schedule of mm-hmm. who I've been in contact with that day. It's always fascinated me, if I could have 2 minutes with the nose of a dog to be able to comprehend what it is that they get, because it just seems so complete that they don't necessarily need eyesight, they don't necessarily need hearing, mm-hmm. they just have a nose to tell them what they need to know in the world.
Yeah, I have a 14-year-old dog who is totally deaf. He went deaf a little over a year ago, mm-hmm. and I can be anywhere on my property and he can find me with his nose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the staff is like, how does he do that? He can't hear you. I said, he doesn't need to hear me. He's smelling me. And you'll see if I come out of the house or something and he's outside, it takes him a minute, but he lifts that head and you'll see him work those air scents until he identifies exactly where I am.
Well, the same thing happens when you're running a hunting dog, because they will get out in front of you and they're working air. They get a little disoriented following a scent cue. They lose you. You'll see them fall back, get behind, pick up your scent cue, and then they'll come running right up and go right beside you and go back out to front. And that's a consistent way that they keep track of the handler. And that's a hard thing for folks to understand, because the primary fear when you're working with a person that wants to be able to walk their dog and cut them loose and not hang on to a 6-foot lead and worry all the time about what the dog is doing, what they're doing, is the fear that somehow that dog is going to take off and they're never going to see it again. And yeah, that can happen, particularly early on. But once you've worked with a dog a bit and you've given them the opportunity to figure out how to follow their nose and how to cue on their handler, it really is a team that's working together. It's a dance, really. It's always been gratifying to me to be able to help folks get past that fear, to know that their dog's nose is so much better than they can even comprehend, and to just trust the dog and the dog will figure it out. And I know you work with folks a lot. Do you have any tips on helping people to realize how to make that dog a team member and be comfortable with the way a dog's nose works?
So, I mean, the biggest thing I would do is tell them to trust the dog, because that nose knows a lot more than the person does. But the trust has to happen in safe environments, because you don't want to risk a dog trying to cross a road, trying to find its person. It is a very hard thing to let a dog loose in an area to go do its thing and then trust that it's going to be able to find you. And they struggle a lot because the dog doesn't make a direct line back to them. And that's probably because that's not where the scent is that's leading them back to their person. But that trust is a hard thing to do. And this is the hardest thing that any person does that has a working relationship with their dog at all, is to trust the dog, because that nose is so superior to ours. You said earlier that you'd like to have a couple hours of having the sense of smell that a dog has. I don't know that I would, because I can only imagine how overwhelming that is. We get some of our service dogs, we train them, and a couple of them we realized, oh no, we didn't expose them to all sorts of these perfumes and body lotions and stuff that people wear. And, they would have aversions to that at first, because the smell is so strong. So, there's a lot of things like that. I'm not sure that I would want to have that nose. I don't know how they operate sometimes with the plethora of smells that we humans put in the environment that the dogs have to work through.
Well, it's just fascinating to me, because it's something I've worked with all my life. Do you currently use any kind of electronics to keep track of a dog when you're on a search?
We do. We have GPS collars that track their movements. So we do it not necessarily to keep track of the dogs, because once a dog is able to be fielded on a search, we're pretty confident that they come back to their owners, no matter how far out they work from them. But we do it more to see what amount of ground they're covering, and if there are areas that we don't get covered in the search. But it's a tracking collar. It's got a GPS in it with an antenna that actually live tracks to our computers.
Okay.
So we can see every movement that the dog is making.
So that'll also give you coverage, so you know where to go back then, or should there be a hit, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of time bird hunters will plug it into the computer and see how far the dogs run and where they've run, and that simple little line that a human is walking, and that's just 10-to-1 multiple courses back and forth of all the ground that the dog is covering.
Right. Well, you can also see both by the tracker and live watching a dog, every time they pause, what they're I think that the same GPS collars that bird hunters use are the same kind we use, because they tell us when our dog stops that it's treeing. Well, our dogs don't tree anything, but and it's because they're treeing or pointing. It's because they were made for bird hunters to utilize. So, and it's all based on the dog being still for a moment or two.
Well, I know that in wildlife now, the biology, they're using telemetry units, and they can literally, over a period of time, watch the home range of a rattlesnake and see where it moves and where it's hanging out and where it frequents and all those sorts of things. So we do live in a new age with all the electronics that are so handy.
We do.
Yes, yeah. I remember back when we had telemetry gear. And you'd have to hold it over your head, and you put on earphones and beep, 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 to find the dogs. Yeah.
It's a little more sophisticated nowadays.
Yeah. I know that when I was a boy and I started out, all we had was a rope and a whistle. That was the extent of it. And look how far we've come.
Yeah.
Do you use any other kind of electronics? I know that you do a lot of work with e-collars and such, and teaching folks how to use an e-collar. What has your experience been with people that are reticent? Because I know that I get some pushback, that there's a perception that the modern electronics are somehow inhumane or unkind or, however you want to phrase it. It's been my experience that used properly, an e-collar is an incredibly effective communication device. It's not about stimulation. It's just about either an auditory cue or a vibration or a slight tactile sensation. And do you find that the same thing in working with your folks?
Yeah, so we get a lot of people who are reticent about it initially, and we do a lot of education because it is a great tool. And people have to realize the dog is born knowing canine language. The human is known. Grows up using canine language or human language. Those languages are not even close to being the same. The things we are taught to do with our body, such as greet people, very frontal, straight on with our back straight, our shoulders squared up, direct eye contact, dogs read that as aggression. That's instinctual in them. And so we have to create a bridge between the two languages. I find that the remote collar, or the e-collar, creates the fastest, clearest, most stable bridge between the two languages, and used properly, not as a discipline tool, just as a marker, like tapping somebody on the shoulder, which is the levels that we train at. We're tapping, it's just a light tap on the shoulder to get attention and to mark something. And the dogs learn 15 times faster with more reliability, allowing us to wean them off of it faster than any other thing we can use, with a lot less effort on the owner's part, and have that reliability for life. So it just lets us create such a strong bridge between the two languages that there's less confusion for the dogs. When you're doing treats and clickers, timing is so very, very critical. The average pet owner that doesn't have a lot of training on board, their timing is off, so they end up creating lots of confusion that the dog has to work through. Where I find with the electronic collars, they're a little bit more forgiving of the timing, at least the way I teach it, which I teach it that I'm marking something, and I mark at a low level, at the lowest level the dog feels and responds to, until the dog does the action or ceases the action, and then everything stops. And so it's a little bit more forgiving than me just getting the treat or the click in there at the exact moment that it needs to happen. So we find that it actually is easier for owners to learn to communicate with their dog the way that I use the remote collar.
And, I think it's an important point, too, the point that you made is that you need to find that lowest level that the dog feels. I will explain when I'm training that when I'm doing aversion work that I need curiosity. So I need a dog to come back repeatedly. And it's a bit of a misnomer to say that a dog smells a thing. Again, the way I would explain it to someone in a class that I was teaching, because their noses are so acute that they get so much more information than we humans can really understand. And it was really brought home to me. I had a female blacktail rattlesnake. I had her 5 or 6 years, and she was very calm, which is a bit unusual for a rattlesnake. But she would allow dogs to come up and literally put their nose on her. I've seen dogs pick her up. And so it was fascinating to watch a dog cue on her because there was nothing pushing back. There was nothing to make that dog cautious or afraid. And so they would come in just fascinated by this new scent. And invariably, the first thing they'd do is go to the snake's rattles. And I'm presuming, particulates, keratin coming off of that hard structure. And they would just focus 30 seconds. They'd have their nose on the rattles, just going up and down. Then they'd go 2 or 3 inches up to the vent of the snake and just focus there. And I'm presuming gastric stuff, residual feces, whatever the dog's picking up. And then they'd go up to the middle of the snake and they'd press their nose right into the skin at the middle of the snake's body, like they were tasting something through the skin of their nose. And I'm presuming chemical process, metabolism, digestion, something. Then they'd go to the head of the snake. And there's something acrid about the smell of the head of a rattlesnake to a dog, because you'd see them go in and go right up to the mouth of the snake and just focus. And I'm presuming, again, gastric stuff, respiration from the lung, and probably venom from the venom glands. They were probably picking that up. And it would be almost an acrid thing, because you'd see the dog just blanch and turn around, and some dogs would just hack, trying to get the smell out. So it's important, I know, that when I'm trying to communicate that to folks, because they assume that the way a dog sees a snake is like they do. They see a shape, an image. And, when you see a snake, you see a particular thing. But for a dog, it could be a host of different scent cues. And you don't know what that dog is picking up. What portion of that process, that smell cue that the dog is picking up. So it's, I think once a person kind of lives with that for time and they figure out, they go, oh, geez Louise, I never realized. Yeah.
It's amazing. There's no telling what the dogs that really are smelling. They're the only experts and the only ones that really know that in this world. But it's incredible the things that they can pick up, because when we're training them to do the service work, they're being taught to alert to the minute physiological changes that happen within the body. And like my cardiac alert dogs typically alert 9 minutes before a cardiac event. So before an EKG or an ultrasound can pick up a cardiac event, the dog will know, because of the physiological changes that are happening in the body, that it's coming. That's how they alert to seizures. Our diabetic alert dogs alert 20 minutes on average prior to the CGMs, which are the machines that actually test blood glucose. They alert 20 minutes on average ahead of that. Wow. And that is all due to the physiological changes. Every now and then you'll find a person who's got a pretty good sense of smell, and they'll notice that a diabetic smells like there's a different smell to them. And it probably has to do with the ketones, the changes in the ketones, but the dogs can smell so much better than that they're so far ahead of it. It's been a little tricky sometimes to teach people to trust their dogs. When a diabetic alert dog says your blood sugar is dropping, believe it. You've got time to do something before it does drop. The same, with a cardiac alert dog, 9 minutes is enough to call 911, which could mean the difference between life or death. Hardest part is teaching the people trust the dog, because so many of them are, oh, my dog's wrong. No, it's not wrong. I don't care what the machine's telling you. So I did a study for the Department of Defense many years ago in trying to test the dog's nose against the robotic IED finders. And the robotic IED finders never got them better than the dog's nose for finding explosives.
Yeah. So, how much do you use? I know when I'm training, I use my body, and I know if I feel a certain thing, the dogs respond. I'll use breath a lot. A dog will eventually, when they make eye contact, they connect with you. They come out and they search out your breath and to try and get a sense of you. And if you give that dog breath and they smell it, you'll see them just soften and relax. Are you able to teach your folks that as well, or get them to understand that?
We try. Some people get it better than others. So, but we always try, because it's one thing to tell a dog and get them to do something, but if your body language and everything else is sending them conflicting information, it's really hard. Leash work is one of the hardest things I ever get anybody to learn, because everybody wants to have their arm and their muscles all tight and hold that arm up, etc. And when you put that kind of resistance on the leash, it's no different than if I grabbed your arm and pulled it, you'd go back against me. And so the dog typically pulls. So, I have a few tricks we do. With some people, we have them hold onto their pockets. And while they can still tense their muscles, they can't put as much tension on the leash. And they're amazed at what a difference it makes. That dog who's been pulling this whole time, the minute I get them gripping their pockets, there's a nice little J in the leash because it's so loose. So, there's tricks, and some work with some people and some it doesn't work with. So we have to try and see what works with each individual.
Yeah. Well, I know that if I'm handling dogs, in the old days, I used to use a whistle a lot, and I used to use different cues. And now I just think it. If you have that intimate and tighter relationship with the dog, they know what's in your brain. It's telepathy as opposed to something else.
Right.
And it might take a little bit of time to get there. And I think it's hard for folks who've never had that kind of a connection, or been able to develop that kind of a connection, to really appreciate just how deep the connection between a dog and their person is.
I think they have to be willing to accept that there's that kind of communication as well. I see, especially with a lot of my trainers that struggle, and they'll tell me that they're struggling with doing something, and I can walk right out with the dog and do it the first time. And they're like, how in the world did you do that? And it's like, well, I like to tell my clients, just visualize what you want to have happen and make it so. It'll happen. That's a simplified way of doing it. But I just, whether it's instinctual or what it is, that communication, some people have it, some don't. I think it can be developed in a lot of people. There may be some people that can't develop it, but I think the majority, it can be developed in. But they have to be open and willing to have that happen.
Well, I know when I'm greeting a group of dogs, and it's different for me because I tend to have dogs for about 3 to 4 hours, and then I don't see them again. Where you are able to develop a relationship with the handler and the dog over a period of time and spend more time with them. And so my focus often is the dog. And if a human is able to, I can spend time and talk with them. But it's limited because, again, my job is to train the dog, and then get the dog to be able to keep their human safe after the training. And I know that I've got about a nanosecond, because that dog will make a decision. And dogs are excellent judges of human character. If they don't like someone, you better pay attention. And so it's a very conscious thing that I have to come into every time I greet a dog. I shift my body. I give them my back first, or I come in sideways, depending on what the dog is telling me. And as you spoke to that canine culture, you have to talk to them in their culture, not necessarily ours.
Right.
You have to bridge that and meet them part of the way. And so much of that, we'll get back to the point of the beginning of our conversation, is the scent. It's what the dog picks up and what you're throwing off. And I'm sure we humans have all sorts of chemical cues that dogs are picking up that we won't ever understand, but they're just so clever in terms of understanding us.
I think it's just the way that they're genetically programmed. And somebody who's afraid of a dog, there is no way that the person can hide that from the dog because of those cues, if you will, or physiological changes that are chemically taking place in that person's body that the dog smells. And that's all it is. They smell that. And then they react based on how they think they should react to that smell. and what their comfort level is with it. So we get a lot of dogs who are rescued and have never been handled.
Yeah.
And we'll get them because the people, can't do anything with them. The dog gets pretty comfortable with them, but the dog still acts fearful. And, we bring them in here and we put them with a healthy group of dogs. So the other dogs help them become comfortable with people and moving and things like that. But then when we put the owner back in the picture and we take that dog away from that healthy group of dogs, the dog goes, oh no, wait a minute, I'm confused again. Mm-hmm. But, so then we have to work at helping the owner communicate clearly with that dog. And we are establishing a communication method that assists in bridging that gap. And so it does work, but it's amazing how fast the dogs will become less fearful when they're with a healthy pack of dogs, because they're feeding and learning off of the other dogs. And because it's a familiarity to what they've genetically been programmed to understand.
And I know when I trained bird dogs, I would train with the communal yard. All the dogs live together, and they learn together, and they learn, on the same chain gang, and they would learn in groups. Yeah. And it was infinitely easier than a single kind of a thing.
Right.
And I know that because again, I'll see a lot of different folks, and they'll come in with a dog, and when you'll see a dog on rare occasions that you can tell really doesn't like the person they're with. And you can just see that this connection isn't there, and maybe the person is angry or rageful, but there's something there that dog is picking up on that they just don't like.
Yeah.
I had an interesting thing happen again years ago. I was doing sessions in Salt Lake, and I was working again at another vet clinic, and they had a large landscape feature. And I was training in the parking lot of this veterinary clinic. And so that meant that I couldn't have the parking lot until the practice had closed and all the dogs had been picked up for the evening, which meant we could begin work at 7 p.m. Now, it was well lit, a portion of the parking lot, but I would work till maybe midnight, 1 o'clock at night before, we would wrap up the dogs and get the work done. And then I would typically be alone there for about half an hour, 45 minutes while I picked up and got stuff, stowed away and ready to go. And I had my lab with me, a lab with me, and he was off to the side towards the front of the truck. And I had sort of collapsed stuff back, and I'm, putting gear in boxes and getting chairs organized and that sort of thing. And someone had crept in along a back wall and come through a bunch of brush, and was right on the edge of the brush, a place where I normally would go over to pick up gear that had been laying on the ground or whatever. And I never saw him, and I don't think Jackson, the lab, ever saw him. But he picked up that person's scent cue, and he hackled up like a javelina. And this, again, very unlike him, this deep, growling, threatening kind of thing. And that was all from whatever scent was coming off of that person, or whatever that dog was perceiving from that person. And, of course, I looked over there, and I'm wondering, Jackson, what have you got? And there's like a tense 30, 45 seconds, and then this man walks out of the bushes and doesn't say anything to me, just walks away. And just an illustration of how they perceive the world beyond our ability to understand it. Yeah. Well,
they're amazing creatures.
Yes, they are. They truly are. Is there anything else you want to add? Tell me about what we can do to get the word out and help you help people.
Well, to give us a call. We're always happy to help everybody. Give us a call. Check out our website. We do have a contact us page on the website if people want information. And we have a Facebook and Instagram, lots of different social media sites that we always answer questions on as well. So we're always happy to share any knowledge that we have with others so that they can, communicate better with their pet and live happier, more fulfilled lives with them as well.
Yeah. And why don't you give our listeners your website?
It is https:// dogtrainerus.com.
Okay, very good. And again, to our listeners, I will have that stuff in the files on the podcast, so you can go onto the website and look that up and gather that information. Kristi, I want to thank you so much. We've known each other a number of years, and I've always been very impressed by your abilities and your professional manner and your ability to train people and to train dogs. So I just want to let you know I appreciate you, and thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. Thank you, Webb, and I also appreciate your abilities with the dogs. I'm in awe every time I see you work. Thank you. Well, with that, what folks don't know is we're talking on Labor Day today, and I'm sure you probably have a barbecue or some celebration to get to. And I know I was a little concerned here because when I went to, I'm in a small little recording room off the side of the property, and I could hear the whine of weed whackers everywhere. It's that time of year. Yes. But luckily they stopped by the time we were ready to start recording. We were saved. Kristi, thank you so much. You're welcome. Thank you, Webb. Okay. You have a great day, and thank you for your time. Bye-bye. You too. Bye. If you liked this episode, I invite you to visit our website, freerangedogs.com. It's where you can find the stuff you need to live the free-range dog lifestyle. I want to help you with that. Book a consultation call or an in-person training, attend one of our ongoing events, or join our online membership program. We got it all on freerangedogs.com. All right, it's time to head back to the truck and the water bucket for the thirsty dogs. This is Webb Parton signing off, wishing you the boundless joy that comes when you share the outdoors with your best friend.